This is bad enough that it has me thinking, are we really gonna have 6 months of this? This is pretty intense. I mean, like the cold in your face today is like, wow. She's from Arizona. I spent 25 years in Georgia. It's not new to me, but it's been 25 years.
December. March is...
No. March is sucky. April is spring. May is when it gets nice again.
Oh, I was just going to say, April is meh. May is when it begins to be spring, if you're lucky.
Meh. What a good word. Yeah, I'm fond of that word.
I think I signed.
And there was one over here too, so that's
okay.
that side. Yeah, y'all good.
We just moved up to the north side of town and I'm driving on hills for the first time. And yeah.
It's a good time, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's exciting. Yes. Driving home on Monday was eventful because going like up the hill, like trying to not stop fully.
Yep.
While also not running into the car in front of you.
That's the trick.
Yeah.
Because if you stop, then you're not going to go again.
Right.
As long as you're just like barely crawling, it's usually okay.
People were intentionally driving into the curb to stop.
Oh,
Yep.
interesting.
So they didn't hit the cars that were waiting at the stop sign.
Mm-hmm.
That is a strategy that I've never seen before. I'll squirrel that away
For future reference if I ever need it. They taught us that in driver's ed, actually.
Yeah, my
Like if
driver's
your brakes
ed
ever
did
go out
not-
or you can't stop, you should like slowly like ride the curb because friction and stuff. Iowa. Yeah.
Yeah, California probably didn't.
No, not even a little bit. There was no mention of snow.
We learned how to hit deer if you're going.
Yep.
Yeah, you're supposed to speed up, not be like, slow down as much as you can, but at the very last minute, you should speed up, so you don't want to be pointing down, you want to be pointing up.
That is not what I was taught.
I was actually taught the opposite.
You slow down as much as you possibly can, at the very last minute.
We have a physicist in the room, perhaps could tell us what the appropriate way of doing this. No, but the problem is that if it goes through the windshield, you're dead.
Well, that's why you want to go under your car, so you're slightly pulling upward.
But how does acceleration actually make your car rise?
Fraction of a centimeter or something, if you're going 30, that doesn't sound right.
I thought it's better to hit it slower. It's okay to lose your bumper, even your engine. You don't want to go through your windshield.
Yeah.
Speeding up doesn't sound like a good, in any scenario. If you're going 100 and then change to 120, that then flip it completely over so that you can clear underneath it, that might be a good plan. But
Do you know where I learned about some of this? Is that visiting M-City? Have you been to M-City?
not yet.
Oh, it's amazing. So M-City is where they're testing autonomous vehicles here, and they've set up a little town area, a freeway area, freeway signs. Yeah, it's so compact. And they have robot deer and a cornfield. So robots come out, because you want the robot deer to come out of the cornfield, and you want the autonomous cars to act appropriately. And they said explicitly, you do not want the cars to decide to speed up so as to kill all the people inside. This is a bad idea. I have a picture of my wife standing next to a robot deer. That's great.
We let the elementary schoolers go and learn bike safety at M-City, which I thought was a really awesome testing opportunity as well, right? A whole bunch of kids on bikes were unpredictable, but I don't think that any of the autonomous vehicles were being tested at the time.
Well, they said that you can't have any humans on the site because that makes a huge liability risk. You have these robot cars that have indeterminate behavior, otherwise they wouldn't be tested there.
Okay, so there are certain times then that you can come through. My son keeps asking when he can bike on the freeway again. That was a special event. That's not happening regular, right? Shall we? All right. I'm going to be very informal because we're a pretty small group. You can come join us.
We promise we're not scary.
It's just the table.
Yeah, it's just the table and the big light fixtures.
I am really excited to introduce Gus Evrard today. The reason that we put him on our short list for folks who we wanted to bring in for this event is he is one of the faculty, or maybe the faculty, behind both Problem Roulette and Atlas. And I hear students talking about these tools all the time, so I'm really excited to hear about them from him.
Super. Well, happy to be with you today. It's, wish it was warmer. I wish there was less snow. And it is rather cavernous, this room. I'm not going to wear a mic right now. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I'm going to roam a little bit, and I've got the remote that Robin loaned me here. So I want to talk to you about, which isn't working, I want to talk to you about Problem Roulette and Atlas and my experiences with that with respect to, this worked a second ago. Let me just see if it'll operate again by doing this, doing that. And no, all right, it's not going to do that. So, oh.
The second tool here we can try.
Yeah, I think the other thing is I have about 75 tabs open in Chrome right now, and that could also be an issue with respect to getting my computer to wake up. Okay, great. Thanks. So yeah, I want to start with my sort of recent history with data and lots of it. So if we go to Google Trends and ask how frequently have been people using the phrase big data since 2004, what you can see is that it really wasn't a thing until about 2011 or so. And then it peaked in interest about 2015 or so. And it's still there, but people don't use that term as much as they used to, right? Now in 2010, I happened to set up a course that was kind of about big data, but it was really about fourth paradigm science. And so that course is still on the books today. It hasn't been offered since fall of 2017. The course is called Cyber Science. And the whole idea was this was an honors class, and it wasn't originally intended for data science majors, because data science wasn't a thing really in 2010. But you can actually find the materials on open.umich from 2010. That was the first offering. And I kind of will tell you a little bit about that you can take this, because I actually, in the course description at the end, said, in this new fourth paradigm, cures for cancer might be found by the collected investigations of agents computing, and then wrote in the cloud in parentheses, which you don't do anymore, right? So the cloud was new, right? And the whole, I would have been happy if the students taking this class when they left could use the word cyber infrastructure intelligently in a sentence. Like that was really the reason behind the course. So that, I love data. Then that was 2010, and then 2012, Harvard Business Review decided that data scientist was the sexiest job of the 21st century. And, we have a Center for Data Science now, and data science majors are here, and we're producing data scientists. So, it's a thing. If you look at Gartner and you're a fan of the Gartner hype cycle, in 2012, big data was on its way up, and so was the Internet of Things. By 2014, big data was on the way down, and Internet of Things was peaking. In 2015, actually, they took big data off of their hype cycle. It left the building, as it were. But you can see a lot of, it's always fun to take a look at some of these things that are like, I don't know, enterprise 3D printing. Like that's now on the slope of enlightenment. And we have 3D printers on campus and stuff, but it's still not quite. I don't have one at home, for example. But the language has changed, right? So it became the data tsunami, which was in my abstract, was, people had been using that phrasing around the same time that big data started, but it's now more, about managing, right? So Gartner is now managing the data tsunami. And I know this group, I don't have to unpack these acronyms, right? I hope, right? But edge computing to me was a little weird, but I get it, Put the processors where the data's being gotten, not on the back end, and then you have to send less data. I get that. And then here's another sort of blog. out there about taming the data tsunami, right? So we're just awash in data, right? This is a beautiful image that reminds us we're not there today. Okay, and then around this, in the middle of this period, the Learning Analytics and Knowledge Conference started to happen, and Stephanie Peasley, who I know is on your list of speakers, in fact maybe next week, is was there
Maybe
at the
in a couple
beginning.
months. Yeah.
Pardon? Yeah, was there at the beginning. And I think this is from a panel discussion at, I believe, what was the first incarnation of the of the LAC meetings. And Simon Buckingham-Shum is a sort of famous person in this space. It started as an engineer and then became kind of a data scientist for education. And I love this title, Educational Data Scientist, a Rare Breed. And in the abstract it says, the educational data scientist is currently a poorly understood, rarely cited breed. Reports vary. Some are known to be largely nocturnal, solitary creatures, while others have been reported to display highly social behavior in broad daylight. So, this is when you're starting a field, you can write papers like this and get them accepted into a publication, right? But the point is that, we don't yet have, I think, a whole core of education data scientists to operate with. And we're at the beginning of this whole instantiation of thinking about education from a data aware and data informed perspective. Okay, and speaking of that, and this group is a group that is reflective of this, the fact that you have, we live at an institution that has taken the step of saying, yes, I believe so much in education research that we're going to create, a department and have staff and faculty who are engaged in this area of research. And in 2013, there came out from our own Department of Education this call for, expanding evidence approaches. And in particular, I want to call out from this paper, that the areas that they mentioned are data mining, learning analytics, and visual analytics. And so what I'm going to kind of show you for at least Atlas is it's very heavily visual, right? And problem related is less so, but it's all about their learning analytics. Okay, and then, it's kind of odd that universities have been largely responsible for launching the Internet of Things and data science and all that stuff. But, we've been kind of slow to apply those approaches to ourselves, internally. And part of it is that, the sensors that you put in an oil field to measure greenhouse gases don't talk back to you. They don't have an independent mind yet, right? But the people on campus do, right? So it's treating people like their data points is a delicate thing, right? We have to be, so people are not equal to things is the main thing. And then there's the question of what is the business of a higher education institution? What are we trying to optimize? What is the widget that we're making, and how do we maximize the output of that widget and minimize the cost? So how to optimize is a really interesting question in this space. Then there's also the issue of data ownership. If you ask Paul Robinson, our registrar, who owns grades, he'll kind of laugh and say, well, it's a shared ownership model, right? I mean, in the sense that he's technically the owner of grades in the sense of reporting out to the world what students achieved in terms of these letter grades. But at the same time, it's the individual instructor in relationship with the student that kind of sets that standard, right? And so it's really very fragmented, this space. And then, of course, there's the issue of, who wants to be like Facebook. So I'm going to tell you about these two projects, Problem Roulette and Atlas. And here I'm putting up our mission statements for the two projects. So, the mission of Problem Roulette is to provide equal opportunity for all students to develop competency through practice testing and distributed practice. Whereas Atlas is all about just promoting deeper knowledge of the curricular history of the university, and in so doing, affect people's decisions in a positive way. And the common themes here are one of access and transparency. I mean, before Atlas came about, it was very hard for even faculty members to understand simple things like how many students have taken, I'm about to teach a course for the first time, how many students have taken this course in the past? What are those students like? Who else has taught this course? what are the majors of these students who take this course? We have a lot of questions that we have, and the data are sitting there, and it's a question of freeing the data and providing it to the people who need it when they need it. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about problem roulette, and we'll move to Atlas after that. So the motivation for problem roulette came about when I was teaching Physics 140 for a while. I'm a Thurnow professor here, and part of the reason I got a Thurnow professorship was because I put on my shoulders Physics 140, which is the first semester mechanics class for scientists and engineers, and it's about 75% engineering students. And in those days, we had 3 lecture sections, and one person did them all. So you would give the lecture at 9 a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays to 200 students. They would leave the hall, another 200 would enter, you'd give the same lecture at 10, then those 200 would leave, and another 200 would enter, and you'd give the same lecture at 11. And what was amazing was in the early clicker years, when the students didn't buy clickers, we bought clickers for them and put them in cabinets in the back of the room. And amazingly, you would get 200 students slotting their clicker with a certain number on it into the right panel, the right area, and the next student would be able to pick it up. And this went on for 14 weeks with very little hiccups. I was stunned. So super high quality students that we have here, right, to be able to pull that off. And what I realized was, when I last taught it in 2009, I had some conversations with students about, I would do the traditional thing of putting a couple of old exams on the C-tools at that time, and say, here, look at these to help you prepare. And they always asked for more. And I was like, I can't get my hands on more, or I'm just tired. I can't just keep doing this every semester, uploading all this stuff all the time. And I thought, and in those days, Google Docs was a new thing. This was before the university signed the agreement with Google that we have now. So I hired an engineering physics student for relatively little money and handed him some Word docs from previous exams. And I said, why don't you strip out each of these questions and make a Google Doc up for each one of them. And then we're going to write a little server that's going to just provide students access to this, right? So that's what we did, but I'm jumping a little bit ahead. Let's think about what we do in these classes to this day is have these fairly high stakes exams. There are still 4 exams in Physics 140, 3 midterms and a final. They are typically 1.5 to 2 hours long, 20 to 25 questions. And they're pretty stressful, right? I mean, students have to demonstrate competency across multiple concepts. They have to, operate with information they're given and calculate things, employ appropriate methods to execute solutions. And then to them, it seems like in some courses, literally the problems are in random order. Because you'll once you got to the point where you could create a template and shuffle your questions, then that meant that it was a lot easier to prevent cheating, right? Because one person's question 1 was another person's question 14, and so that randomness was kind of the origin of the problem roulette. But what was happening in 2009, which is the last time I taught Physics 140. Was that students were coming to me and saying, well, look, you should provide more because some students have access to more and we don't. And so these social disparities, exist because if you're a member of a fraternity or engineering honor society, you had access to deep piles of old exams and therefore had more to study from. Whereas if you're just a first-gen student working in a library with maybe a friend, then you had what the professor gave you and that was it. And then this was kind of a post-motivation. So after we set up Problem Roulette, there was this review in 2013 of literature in the education psychology space that reviewed something on the order of 200 studies done by different teams in that space. And basically, they came up with the finding that practice testing and distributed practice are the only 2 techniques that have high utility. Basically, every time somebody studied the effects of students having distributed practice and practice testing, the students would benefit from those activities as opposed to other activities, flashcards or whatever, that weren't quite as effective. So yeah, there is Mike Mills, who's now at UCLA grad school. He should be finishing. I got to check in with him. contacted him last year. He wasn't done yet, but he is in applied physics now in UCLA. And he's the guy who wrote the original code to serve up these Google Docs. And the original setup was basically, we served Physics 140, and the students would come in and select, I want to study for exam 1, I want to study for exam 2, I want to study for exam 3, or I want to study for the final. So there were 4 topics, and then questions within those topics based on the exams that we had. We've since evolved to have more meaningful topics. So we have physics topics like angular momentum, energy, conservation, etc. So now the main point is that it was an optional zero risk study service. There's no points associated with anything, no points to lose. And it offers topical random access, and the main thing is that all of the content is local and authentic, right? We're not reaching into an exam bank from a publisher and throwing the same stuff that you had on your homework sets, for example. So since we started in 2012, we've grown, I think next term we'll be at 16 courses in 10 departments, and we've served roughly 9 million total problems to about 40,000 students in that time. And for a while we were advertising when we first got going. On the right-hand side, you'll see our old logo. On the left-hand side, you see when you get together with Academic Innovation, one of the things they do for you is give you access to designers and people who do user testing and really fine-tune your app. And so we have a new logo and such. But we were promoting Problem Roulette on the Bus when we first started in 2012, because essentially a lot of these problems take about a minute or a minute and a half to solve. And so in the 5-minute or 10-minute ride from North Campus to Central, you could be doing, a handful of problems in Chem 130, for example. And so here was the architecture of the original service. Like the student was logging into the server. We had a database for each one of the users. We had the problem database that mapped the topics to questions and also the courses to the topics. And then all of the data, all the problems were out there in the cloud. And so we were able to then capture the student response. And the original service was set up so that we would give feedback to the user immediately after they answered. And the feedback would include a histogram of all these were multiple choice questions. So we'd give a histogram of all of the other responses of the students who answered that question. So they'd know right away whether they were right or wrong and how wrong they were, in the sense of, if 85% took C and I took D and there were only 5% with me, I know that one's really weird, right? And then we also gave them their time to solution versus the median time to solution that we had for each question. And so students liked it and still like it. And to my amazement, the little server that we stood up quickly got swamped, and we had to work with the library and what was then called the Learning Technology Integration Group. John Legia, who's since retired, and Noah, whose last name I'm blanking on, helped us get to the point where we could serve 15,000 sessions a month. And that was been pretty steady. And then this graph ends at about 2017, which is when I wrote an AIF, an Academic Innovation Fund's proposal to basically move Problem Roulette into the AI world to be supported by academic innovation. So just some testimonials, because we won the 2019 Provost Teaching Innovation Prize, and part of it is you have to collect things that students say about your innovations. And this was early on, where a student in physics was basically saying, I did some normal studying for the first midterm and did okay, but I felt I didn't do as well as I should have. So I went back and used Problem Roulette. I gave it a whirl. I didn't think students say they gave things a whirl anymore, but apparently they still do. And they said, no longer relying on memorization. The concepts actually stuck with me at exam time, right? And then this one, I'll just show you one more student testimonial. This one I really love, because this looks like we paid this person to say this, right? I mean, in the sense that, the bolded part, it takes many, what she was, I think this was a woman, what she was saying was, you don't give us an answer key. You don't give us a link to show me the answer. And we have that option now, but most of our courses don't actually execute that. And in part because, we want that desirable difficulty. We want some degree of tension right? And this student got it perfectly, right? It takes many questions and many tries to build an enduring understanding of the idea, not just seeing once and forgetting. That's the sort of thing that leads to mastery of a question or concept, right? And that's exactly what we wanted to support. Yeah, question.
So you talked about measuring and giving feedback in terms of like how wrong someone was in terms of the distribution of responses.
Yeah.
But can you talk about the feedback that you give students in terms of why they're wrong? Like how do you structure your multiple choice answers based on like the steps that a student would need to take? Because it seems like students that are like 75% of the way there could get to 100, but what about the students that are like at 20%? How would they respond to this type of solution?
So we're at a stage where we don't really have a good set of scaffolding around the question. The questions are really just old exam questions, and the students encounter them in the same way that they would encounter the question during an exam. Meaning, right now, there isn't a lot of structure around the question, the set of questions that we have in a given topic. But you can imagine that what we can be doing, but aren't doing yet, is understanding who the student is a little bit more from the perspective of, let's see how you're doing on the first 5 questions, and if you're not getting it, then we're going to dial down a little bit and maybe throw in some additional links, or start to find some way to get the student to have access to either a help room or SLC study group kind of encounter. Because I think connecting them to people, I don't think we're ever going to have the ability to really build out the kind of tutoring facility that say Pearson can provide with mastering, right? Because that is a lot of work, and I don't think we have enough resources to really do that across all of the courses we serve. So we have to think in a lightweight way, and I think the lightweight way is to connect students with students and students with instructors and support personnel who can help them master the concepts that they need to master. So here's a breakdown of the number over a 4-year period from 2013 to 2017. Here's how students are studying by time of day. So midnight is on the left and on the right, and then we've broken it down so that all days are blue, and then the weekday is green, and the weekend is purple. And you can see that they're studying on the weekends. That's not, we anticipated that, but now here's an objective measure of that, right? And the other, do you see a feature, or what features do you see that you might remark upon?
Late night studying.
There's certainly, students, there aren't too many students cranking away at 4 o'clock in the morning, but there are a few, and undoubtedly that's the day of the exam, right? That's one thing that when you look at the activity, we have a 2015 paper associated with problem roulette that was in one course, Physics 240. And when you look at the behavior as a function of time before the exam, it's kind of logarithmic in terms of the volume, and it ramps right up to 1 hour before the exam time, and then goes to 0. But what feature might you see there? Well, during the week you can see some dips where students are going, leaving class or going to class as they close up. But this is where I learned that dining halls close earlier on the weekends. Right? I was sitting with the student who had made this plot, and I said, "Why is that dip at dinner in the weekends shifted by about an hour relative to the weekdays?" He said, "Oh, well, the dining halls are." So that's, this is data, right? This is how I learned that the dining halls are. So I'm going to share with you just a little bit of. We're trying to put together a paper, and we as Noah Weaver-Dyke and some of the other folks who have supported me with the analysis of this corpus. I have to say, I am a first-generation computational cosmologist. I'm a member of the Dark Energy Survey. I still have a day job of doing that stuff, right? I am not an education researcher, by training or by identity yet, but I'm growing that piece of me, So I've been a little slow to publish anything out of this. We published the first paper that described the service, but now we've got this pile of data, and it's like, well, we better look at it and actually see what it says, right? So I'm going to share with you a little bit of that. And Noah's been putting together the data set from the original service in a nice packaged form, HDF5 format and all that. You know, basically every course has a term, every course term pair has a data set associated with it of students and how they interacted with the problems and such. So there's, if you're interested in gaining access to that, just talk to me and I'm happy to give you access. So let me show you some usage patterns. I know this is a big table over on the left-hand side, but the first row shows you the volume that we're talking about. And it's, we're dealing with large courses. Stats 250 is, of course, the largest course on campus now. And the percent of users there in the third column, it turns out that after I said I set this up in physics, and then I stopped teaching Physics 140. And it's funny, kind of sad, that the usage in physics has not been as high as the usage in other courses. And I don't want to go into reasons for that because it's mostly political and complicated, but I'm happy to talk about it afterwards.
It's because you and Tim McKay fight so much, is that?
Well, Tim hadn't been teaching those courses for a while either, and so anyway, it's mostly because the content got stale. We weren't updating it regularly, and the topics sort of shifted somewhat, so students were getting confused. Also, I'll show you in a minute that the degree of difficulty of these questions is higher, which you can see on this line. So the median average response time is a couple of minutes for physics, and it's more like, a minute and change for the other courses. And then over here on the plots, what I'm showing you is, I don't know if you can see it from the back, but they're both log axes. There's a mean session length on the x-axis, and on the y-axis is the number of sessions that the student had. So basically when they log on, they come, they work problems for a while, then they leave. That's called a session. The mean session length is of order half an hour in these courses. That's the red lines. And the number of sessions in Chem 130 is something like 15 or so, but some students do hundreds of sessions over the course of the term. So this is on a single term basis, right? And so I think the students that are living kind of, I forget what happened to there isn't, is there a?
No, that one doesn't have it. Just push it again, I think.
Okay, thank you. Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah. I mean, these students I think are an interesting cohort. We haven't tried to do any clustering analysis yet, but I think pulling out these students and comparing them to like, students down here are the crammers. They do like 1 or 2 super long sessions, right? And here, be interesting to compare and contrast their attitudes, their thoughts of why they're thinking this is a successful strategy, against the students up here who are presumably really executing successful strategies, unless they're really running themselves into the ground by studying too much, right? That's another possibility. So this is now just showing you the mean correct response rate in the 3 courses, and I put preliminary here because first of all, it is preliminary, but we're also going to change the display here because these colors are a little weird, but they're overlapping histograms. But in Stats 250, the typical problem has a correct response rate of 80%, whereas in Chem and Physics, the correct response rate is more like 60%. We set them up so that they tend to be harder problems, and we aim for a median exam score of about, say, 65%. In physics. Because we want to have enough room for wings and to really see the tails of the distribution, right? In fact, here's the story. When I was teaching Physics 140 with 650 students in it, when I would give an exam, my policy was, you get 100% on my exam, I give you free lunch, right? And like with 650 students, the last thing you want is for 80 of them to get 100%, right? That's not where, so I would take 3 students, typically, after an exam, out for lunch. And it was, point of pride for them, and it was great for me to meet some really talented, students that were able to score 100%. So that's the number, that's the mean correct response rate, and here's now the mean time to solution. This is what I mentioned before, where the physics problems take a little bit longer, and in fact, some of them are out here, and they're approaching 10 minutes is out here. So, these are, I like to think of these as little like knowledge nuggets, and it's like, you don't want students to be struggling for 10 or 15 minutes on a problem like syllabus, because if you're on a 2-hour exam, that's just too long. So in terms of grade benefit, back in our 2015 paper, we published a grade benefit of about a quarter grade point earned for students who were on the high side of usage. So we just split the student population in half, taking the ones that had used the service a lot versus those who used it a little or not at all. And the students who used it a lot had a benefit of about quarter letter grade. And we showed it in kind of this way. I'm showing you here for Stats 250 and Chem. This is their student GPA in other classes. So at the end of term, what's their GPA in all their classes, excluding Stats 250, for example. And then this is students who are then further binned by how many problems they did over the term, up to 32, up to 128, or more than 128. And you can see the more problems you work, the more that you rise up in terms of grade earned. And also the other thing I want to make sure, there's also, you can also see that the green points in stats sort of peter out, and the students who come in with low GPA tend to not work as much as they should. So that's a messaging back to the instructor and the students that we should be, closing that loop. And then to finish out, research that we've got, so females consistently study more than males. Here what I'm showing is for Stats 250, for each of the terms that we have available from fall 13 to winter 2017. First of all, you can see that this was when Stats first came on to this service, and then they built up content and the usage went up and up, right? And then they plateaued and they're running at about, an average of 150 problems per term or so. But you can see that females outperform males, or in terms of they outwork males, right? Consistently in every term. Yet, and furthermore, if we look at what their correct response rate is on the service, so this is the difference in the correct response rate for females minus males, written in percent. This would be 10% and minus 10% shift in correct response rate. And what we see is in physics, there's almost no difference. And in stats and chem, there's a little bit of a disparity where females are underperforming with respect to males. But these bands are 95% confidence ranges, and they're pretty close to zero, right? So there's a small decrement for females on studying on the platform. But when we compare it to final grade, so this is what happens when the actual final grades are assigned, and the final grades are many sigma away from zero in females, in particular in Chem 130 and Physics 240, are really at a disadvantage in terms of final grade. Yeah, question?
Do all students in these classes use problem roulette?
So it's almost all in Chem 130. I had that actually in,
I guess, I'm sorry.
Back up to here. That's third row, shows the percent using the service. You can see it's 66 in physics, 81, 96.
So when you're looking at the grade difference between male and female, you don't know whether or not these are male and female users of problem roulette. All you know is that what percentage of students use problem roulette and then what the end gender difference was.
Yeah, I don't think it would change very much if we just restricted ourselves to only users of problem roulette on these graphs.
So your suggestion is that the women study a lot more in order to get about the same grade?
Well, yeah, and it's even worse. I'm saying that they study more, and yet when it comes time to actually perform on the exam, they underperform relative to the way they're performing on problem roulette. So what we don't have yet is direct links with, again, this is one of the things that we need to set up, is direct links to the pre-exam studying and actual responses on the exams. We don't have access to the actual exam responses. Yes.
Do you have access to the, like you say that women do more problems. Can you see men and women's performance over time on the number of problems they do? Like, are women doing more problems but not being as successful at them by the end of their studying?
Yeah.
Because I imagine it increases, right?
Right. I mean, one of the problems with looking at time evolution is the fact that there's constantly new material being tossed in. And so it's, we haven't figured out a clever way to filter the data so that we can, tease out time dependence. Because basically measuring learning of this, if you have ideas of how to do that, I'd love to talk about it. But it's not clear. there aren't clear time-dependent trends on sort of overall correct response rate. Like, it's not that students just go up, 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 or down, 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 down. They're kind of up and down, up and down, up and down over the course of the term. Especially as, you know, new materials getting introduced all the time, and they're dealing with new topics all the time. So, but I did want to, you know, maybe this addresses. I'm sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, have you thought about maybe controls for some of the exogenous factors that could be influencing this, like prior academic preparation or level coming into college?
We do have access to that information, yes. And my guess would be, though, that when you looked at, if you look at this birth sex difference, I'm going to guess that the females are coming in with better credentials than males in general. So it would, if anything, exacerbate. I mean, if you were looking at, say, ACT or scores, I'm going to guess. Or, okay, ACT math, maybe that's not true. But we have not made an attempt to go to pre-college indicators. This is maybe a little bit hard to see, but this is a paper I came across about 3 days ago that was published back in September. And this came to me through Tim McKay and the Seismic team about gender performance gaps. And the key thing is kind of in this plot. There are lines drawn between your incoming ACT scores and then they surveyed students. This was at Minnesota, on about 2,000 students taking science and engineering courses at the introductory level. And they surveyed them for test anxiety, they surveyed them for interest, and then they looked at, you know, correlations between, say, ACT and exam performance and test anxiety and exam performance and ACT and test anxiety, blah, blah, blah. So where there's a red line, there's an anti-correlation, and where there's a blue line, there's a positive correlation. And this is a blue line that says that if you come in, there is a positive correlation between ACT score and exam performance, not too surprising. There's also an anti-correlation between ACT score and how anxious you are in the exam. That's also not surprising. But what is the main result of their work, one of the key results, is that there is a red line going this way for females and not for males. And that means that your test anxiety actually the degree of test anxiety is seen as a factor in actual exam performance for females and not as a significant factor for males. So I haven't, like literally, I got this paper 3 days ago, I skim read it, I dragged and dropped the plots. I need to read it more carefully, and actually I think we need to try to replicate that study here because we have the numbers and we actually have problem roulette that we can bring into the analysis that will give us additional information beyond what's available to this study. Okay, and then to close out problem roulette, we have an expanding feature set with the academic innovation folks. The original service had just one study mode. You came in, you picked the course, you picked the topics you want to study, and boom, you start getting problems. And it was super simple, and I loved it, but you know, it doesn't serve everybody's needs. One thing that people were asking for was let me make an exam and take it in a timed manner. So there's exam mode. There's also the ability for instructors and others to create question sets. And I've used question sets in class. So I taught the spring term version of Physics 140 for the first time. I hadn't been back to teaching 140 for a decade. Went back and taught it in spring. And I brought in question sets from Problem Roulette every Friday. And that's how we worked in groups to solve problems. And then now this is a really cool thing, which we're working with the Science Learning Center to support study group leaders there. There's a group mode where students can get on, invite other friends to study, and then study synchronously, whether they're in the same location or not. And then just this term, for the first time, we're going to be able to, we haven't done any messaging out to students other than those reports of when they answer the problem. And now, with the help of Holly Derry and academic innovation, we're going to start to think about how we might want to nudge students or how we might want to just query students about, say, their level of anxiety coming up for the exam. So thanks to especially all these people, Ben Hayward, who's the software development lead. Ollie did all of the yeoman's work of completely refactoring the service, and we brought back all the content from the cloud into a database, so it's all sitting in a database now. And then David Nesbitt is the software portfolio manager, and David Cornell is user experience, and then Holly is behavioral science lead at AI. All right, so I'm going to segue it into Atlas. And by the way, I'm not quite this one's not going to buzz me, so
No.
if just
4:15.
Pardon?
4:15.
Okay.
Just, you want questions at the end, or do you want to?
Well, you guys can pepper me with, you've been peppering me with questions. I'm happy to take questions in the middle.
So two questions about the problem roulette.
Mm-hmm.
You described it, some of the uses as being for fairly short time frame questions. How appropriate would it be for questions that just take longer to work out? I mean, suppose, for my class, if I put something up that would take, 15 to 30 minutes to work out, is it gonna?
Well, we're not limited to multiple choice format. There's also choose from a list and choose multiple entries from a list. There's matching possibilities. There's probably fill in the blank. There's other simple forms, but what we don't have yet is like, give me a paragraph or give me a LaTeX file as a solution, right? So we don't have sophisticated means of addressing. But if you had multiple choice.
I kind of get that, but that would be really quite incredible if that.
Yeah.
I'd like that. But suppose it was, find this voltage to 3 significant figures. Could it grade whether those are correct or not, or?
I'm pretty sure if we talked to Ollie, he would say, yeah, we can work this out. Meaning if there was a numerical answer, and you just had to evaluate the numerical answer, and even if there was, say, a analytic LaTeXable formula as an answer, that's probably another form of answer that we could generate. I mean, this is also you're getting to the point where most of the usage of problem roulette has been in large courses that have these high stakes exams, but that's not all of the usage. In fact, Dave Bridges teaches a nutrition course where he has students write questions. And the students then work on questions that were written by other students. And so he's just used the fact that this is a question authoring tool that can have a topical ordered set of questions, and he's using it in that way.
So, how long does it take to get into the system? I mean, if you've got a backlog of material and.
I think this sounds like we should talk afterwards.
Okay.
Okay, but that is a bottleneck right now. And it's not super easy to bring in your content, although we.
Okay, so
we've depending on how your content is structured. If it's structured in JSON or something, then it's easy. But if it's not well structured, then it can be more painful.
Okay.
Yeah, quick.
Given the impetus for starting problem roulette, have you disaggregated data in other ways to see if, for example, students of different SES backgrounds who maybe aren't in these fraternities, et cetera, or aren't in honors programs, or students by race and ethnicity, to see if your goal of increasing equitable access is being reached?
So you're absolutely spot on that we have not looked at that carefully yet. So but I think what we do know is that students with low GPAs tend to not use the service as much as students with high GPAs. And then you can do correlations from the space of GPA into other dimensions like first gen or SES if you want, and there's going to be some degree of correlations there. So this is why the messaging is important, and we are integrated. There is some degree of integration with eCoach, and eCoach is a platform that's more able to address sort of the nudging part of moving students to hopefully give them advice to take some actions. Problem roulette has not been a platform where we give advice, and haven't actively tried to reach out to certain cohorts of students to bring them into the platform, except through Science Learning Center and engagement with other services like SLC. Yes.
So problem roulette is connected to the student's identity.
Yeah, the students authenticate, so we know who they are. Yeah.
Okay. And so, do they know that they're? I mean, is it in place that they know that it might be used for research purposes? Is it possible to do research on that data, or?
Yes, we fall under the general category of exempt from IRB, specific IRB approval, as long as we, strip identities and analyze the exhaust in a way that can't identify an individual student. And it helps that this is a points-free zone, right? There's not, we're not talking about we have their grades in a separate database that AI has access to, but, the actual responses within problem roulette are worth nothing, because it's points-free. Okay, Atlas. Atlas began as Art 2.0. Fred was there at the beginning of this, and it has roots all the way back to actually more like 2003. And in 2003, I was chair of the LSA Information Technology Committee and inherited a project from Phil Hanlon, who was the former chair, to take a look at pairs of courses and how students were engaging in pairs of courses either taken sequentially or concurrently. And this was what was then an ITS partnership program, and it was maybe $40,000 or $50,000 to money to spend to do some data analysis. And then Phil Hanlon got booted up into the dean's office, and I ended up inheriting this task, and I started looking at it, and it was kind of ill-defined and complicated. So with a team of people, we backed out and we said, listen, let's create a service where faculty and staff can come in and get access to simple enrollment information, grade information, including pairs of courses. So grade in course A versus grade in course B, right? For courses taken either concurrently, A followed by B, B followed by A, right? And so that's the kind of service we built out, and it was called Academic Reporting Tools, and that was released to campus in 2006, and it stayed there for 10 years. And it's still, actually, you can still log on to Art 1.0 if you're on the access list, because there was an access list, not everybody could see this, and this remains a problem, is role-based identity and role-based access. However, okay, so then Tim McKay, my good friend in physics, came along and proposed to the Third Century Initiative to build the Digital Innovation Greenhouse, and it was going to support 3 projects initially: eCoach, Student Explorer, which is a student success tool that Steve Lawn had a great hand in putting together, and ART. And ART was going to be rebooted, and so we took ART 1.0 and refactored it, and the main thing was we were going to turn it loose to the whole campus community, particularly to the student community. And so in 2016, we went live with our first service called Course Profile, and that was like a deck of cards, and each card had, the Pokemon summary of that course. And so here's what it looks like today, although not today. There's been some changes. We just had an update this past week. But this is Physics 135, Physics for the Life Sciences. You get some information about the grade up here, prerequisites. So this is replicating what's in the course guide a little bit. But then here's the student evaluation of teaching summaries. So for these 8 core questions that every course has to have, 5 of them are related to the course itself, 3 of them to the instructor. And so the 5 course-related questions about the desire to take, did it increase your understanding? How was the workload relative to other courses, similar courses? What were your expectations for what you needed to do for this class? Clearly explained, which, this you could argue might live better with the instructor rather than the course, but it was categorized as a course-related question. And then finally, did this increase your interest? And you see that for this first semester, sort of pre-med physics class, the desire to take is 37%, and increased your understanding is 42%. It's a tough road to hoe, this one, Yes.
Is there a way for students to see like the median or average percentage for similar courses? Like, this is an introductory course.
Yeah.
Like, so can they see across introductory courses the average, desire to take is this? Is this above or below that average?
We have academic spotlights on the service, and that's a spotlight that I've had on the Trello card for Trello deck for a while, but it hasn't yet been built out. But yeah, having the context is important, and that's our kind of mantra, is to provide the context. And then what I always like is to look at these pathways. And so when you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you can see what courses that a Physics 135 student took before taking 135, what they take during, and this is the lab, so about 87% of them take the lab at the same time, but not all of them. And then here's what they take afterwards. And so this is interesting, not just to the students, but mostly we want to build out deeper dives into this type of data for people in charge of departments and programs. So that was our first deck. Our second deck was released a year later and has a page for every instructor on campus. So if you're teaching and you are not a graduate student and not an adjunct and stuff, we have a page for you. And then finally, last year, we released another deck of cards associated with degrees on campus. Bless you. And so here's the Bachelor in Computer Science, just to show you. And so for most of these decks, what we do is take a 5-year average. Our view is over 5 years, because for students, they don't care what happened 20 years ago. And with the exception of the degrees deck, we take a 10-year view on degrees, and you can see, computer science at 22, it's grown by a factor of 10 in a decade, right? And then we also give students a sense of how many semesters it takes to complete the degree, right? Which is helpful for students and parents, right? How much, we haven't yet put up a dollar sign next to this, right? But, it gives you a sense of how long is it gonna take? How much effort does a dual degree in computer science and something else, how much effort does that take? Right, and so a lot of students do dual degrees, and here's the common co-majors, and for CS it's math and econ, and physics is down here too. So we rolled out in, like I said, 2016, and that's the end of this graph, and you go to Google Analytics, and this is last month. And basically, we had some degree of advertising going on in the beginning, mostly through LSA student government and central student government, and a little bit of social media stuff, but not much. But basically, and all of the course guides, most of the course guides on campus now have links into the course profile page of that corresponding course, and that's how we got students' eyeballs, basically. And so we're running now at about 10,000 students per week. This was the first week of term this term, and as we go into backpacking, so that this is backpacking, that's backpacking, that's when you see the peaks. But even in between backpacking, even during summer orientation now, we're running at about 3,000 hits per week during summer orientation. And this is the email. We have a feedback button on all our pages, and it's amazing that we get 10,000 users a week and one piece of feedback per week. So, people are busy, and they don't necessarily know that there's humans on the back end of the feedback button, Is there a robot or is there a human? Well, it's human, and it goes into my inbox. And so, I love this because I absolutely love the work Atlas has been doing, right? Wondering if there are opportunities for students interested in software development to contribute to this project. I'd love to help. Yes, we have. We'd love to have you. So there are internships within academic innovation, and we'd love to have students help us out. Okay, so I'm going to show you just a little bit of research done with Kate Holman, who's the R&D lead at AI, and Kyle Schultz, who got his degree here and is a genuine kind of first-generation data scientist, I guess you could call him maybe. He got his job. He was hired before he even had his first degree. And I'm going to just show you a little bit about grades. And here's a histogram of all the grades given out in undergraduate courses in 2013 and 2018. And the years are colored, and here's showing, A plus down to E. And, A plus and A are about half of the grades on campus now. And A plus is becoming somewhat commonplace, right? A plus is running close to 10%. It will soon hit 10%, I suspect. And then, we have to ask ourselves, well, what does this mean, really? But this is what's happening. So I wanted to just investigate, since I have access to this data. I was just curious about how much of that grade increase is due to the increased selectivity of the university. Because every year, when my daughter went here, and I remember going to the Chrysler Center for the sort of, I forget which associate dean was or who was there as the talking head, but they were saying, "You're the best class we've ever had. The SAT scores went up by blah, And so every year we're bringing in better and better students through the standard metrics, right? So we can ask the question, how much of this rise in grades, so ACT and SAT scores have risen consistently along with grades, and how much are those two things linked? So here, just showing you, it's a little bit hard to see in the sense that each one of these points is a person. ACT score is, of course, integer, but we're spreading them out a little bit so you can see the volume of people. And there's not many people down here. There's a few dots down here that you can't see easily. But there's a trend line, right? There's a correlation. It turns out that correlation is pretty persistent across years. So this is going back to 99 and showing you that, there's about a correlation coefficient of, say, 0.3. And so R squared is about 0.1. And, there's a correlation, but it doesn't account for most of the grade variance. Like most of the grade variance comes from other factors. But what we did was to essentially do a little importance sampling Monte Carlo model, where we start at 2006, so we take the correlation between ACT and SAT score and grade point average for the students. And then in the out years, what we'll do is we'll sample randomly from that 2006 distribution, but weighted by the actual distribution of SAT or ACT scores in those later years. So as the curve, then you expect that that correlation will drive, you'll see grades rise because that's what will happen in the correlation, through the action of the correlation. So this is 3.3 down here, this is 3.5 up here. From 2006 to 2018, actual grades have risen to about 3.48 from 3.3. The model accounts for about half of that rise. So, it's kind of interesting. It's a little unsettling. When I first looked at this chart, when it was plotted in a different way, and to me, by eye, it looked like the model was about a third of the increase. But it turns out the numbers are closer to half. And so, enhanced selectivity accounts for about 50% of the rise in undergraduate grades. The rest is other factors that I don't think we're going to get into because that's way complicated. What I can show you is that that finding is pretty persistent. We can break it down by LSA, Engine, and Ross, for example, where most of the undergraduates live. And, the numbers are pretty persistent. Engine, I think you guys have held the line a little bit in terms of the grade rise is not as high. The selectivity is accounting for a larger fraction of it, right? So I think maybe if you want to think of it as, you've got some assessment standards like in 2006, how much have they shifted? They've shifted less in engineering compared to the other schools. Ross has had a bigger shift, right? Because the rise is 0.2. And then when you go into LSA and go division by division, it's kind of interesting. There's, I think, a selection going on, right, where the higher GPA students are tending to head into the natural science areas, and the lower GPA, the lower SAT, ACT scores students are heading more towards humanities. And so the model is kind of sensing this by predicting lower rises, even though the actual grade increase in humanities is higher than the average. Yeah.
I don't know if this matters, but it'll be interesting to see what will happen to your data if you remove classes that have normative grading schemes. Because in that case, you would expect the distribution to be the same. You're going to have the same number of people who are going to succeed and fail regardless of...
It's just very hard to identify. There's no easy way to identify those courses. I mean, we all know of them kind of anecdotally, but to do it at the scale of the whole university is not easy. How many courses like that do you think you have in Engine?
Well, very few in Engine. And a big part of it is, I think the majority of it comes from LSA.
Yeah.
And in Engine, we've been having this big discussion about the impact of normative grading, especially because we talk about the shortage of engineers, so on and so forth, and engineering GPAs tend to be lower in general than the overall population.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I first started teaching Physics 140, the policy of grades were that I would have to stand up on the first day of class and say, half of you are getting A's and B's and half of you are getting C's and D's. And I think Econ 101 is still that way. Some of the math courses may still be that way. And we switched in the late 90s to a model where we have an absolute grading scale and an absolute score. And because what students were telling us was that, by saying that on day one, it meant that the stronger students in the class weren't going to help anybody, because that might mean that they'll slip relative to, why would I help somebody else if that means they're going to push me down the grade scale? And so that market-driven thing woke me up to the point where we needed to change that practice. And so it is surprising that it still exists on campus, but I think it is it's getting rarer and rarer. And then I